People say that God doesn't give you more than you can handle. On December 18th, 2007, I learned that's not true. Thanks to modern science, namely IVF, I became pregnant with twins. I remember being on bed rest. I remember my husband having to wheel me into all my appointments because of it, in a wheelchair. I remember the clothes I wore on the day I went for my 35-week non-stress test. And I remember what we talked about while we were waiting. And I remember when the doctor told me there was no heartbeat on baby A. Shira was born later that day, December 18th, 2007, with the cord wrapped around her throat 5 times. She was not alive. I didn't understand what broken heart meant until that day. I felt when she took a piece of my heart with her. Gabriella followed 15 minutes later. She had a week-long stay in the NICU. My husband Stephen and I had to struggle. How do we grieve for Shira, yet at the same time rejoice in our birth? All I wanted to do was crawl back into bed and wake up when this nightmare was over. Depression took over and stayed for a long time. I knew Shira a short time. I am still her mother. She will always be my baby. I can still remember the feel of her kicking inside of me, and I will never forget. People would then say to me, "Time heals all wounds, at least you have another one." I hated this. It did not make me feel any better. Time eases the way to teach you how to cope with and live with your loss. It doesn't heal. It was years before I could hear the word twins and not burst into tears again. But I needed to have another child. Never as a replacement for Shira. I just wasn't complete yet. I hadn't healed. After a horrendous miscarriage, which included a week-long hospitalization, the doctor refused to let me get pregnant again. Not only did I get tremendously sick during my pregnancies, making them unbearable to everyone, but I was now endangering myself. So we looked into our options. We had adoption or surrogacy. We decided to try surrogacy first, since we had several embryos frozen already. Over a process that would take more than 2 years, we started our search for the perfect woman to carry our baby. The first carrier backed out a week before the transfer after we had invested thousands of dollars on her testing. The second carrier didn't get pregnant after 2 attempts. At this point, we were extremely frustrated by these setbacks, which were over a year in length. We even looked into agencies that match you up with a surrogate, but the expense was outrageous. We were about to look into adoption when we found our third person on the internet, of all places. You have to remember, I was entrusting this person with the most precious thing in the world to me, my embryos, which would turn into tiny little human beings. And that was the hardest part, relinquishing the control. Therefore, we needed to feel a connection to Lindsay. She was determined to take care of this pregnancy the way she did for her own pregnancy and her own child. She's devout in her faith, which is very important to Stephen and me. The connection was definitely there. An immense amount of paperwork, lawyer meetings, and testing followed. Well, let me tell you, those agencies missed an amazing opportunity. Not only did Lindsay get pregnant on the first try, but she was the most fabulous, wonderful, nurturing carrier. She was such a good candidate that both embryos the doctor implanted took. We were going to have twins again. Lindsay is a beautiful person, both inside and out. What she gave us is nothing short of a miracle. Stephen and I were on tenterhooks the entire pregnancy. In fact, I was so nervous I gained sympathy weight with her. Again, two warring emotions. We were cautiously optimistic. This past August 13th at 8:41 a.m., Lindsay gave birth to our twin girls in the same minute, only 30 seconds apart. My heart has grown tremendously in the past 7 years, enough to have room for all of my children. I will never forget Shira, but Elisheva and Margalit have been able to bring the broken pieces of my heart back together. I have been given not one, but two miracle healers from God. There will always be a hole in my heart right here where Shira should have been. But these new lives, these precious babies, have reminded me of the other miracle healers that I didn't realize I had. Talia, Gabriella, and my husband Stephen, who had to care for me when I was grieving by putting his own grief aside. God doesn't give you more than you can handle? Never say that to someone who is grieving. The truth is, God often gives us more than we should have to handle. But God has certainly answered my prayers.